she knew it was so bothersome to her that we can say, I want these gifts. Be careful what you wish for, but you will awaken them with meditation. But here's the warning. So that's one warning. Don't do meditation for the gifts. Do meditation to transcend levels of consciousness. We don't want to get stuck in clairvoyance and remote viewing, which will happen, but keep moving on and reach Christ consciousness.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernie Beitman, increasingly known as Dr. Coincidence, because I have a book coming out which hopefully will be called The Adventures of Dr. Coincidence. But who knows? Publishers make their own decisions. And would you please subscribe to the channel if you haven't? Would you just put a couple of likes on there and contact me? You might really want to contact me after this discussion today, because this discussion today is the closest I've come to a scientific explanation for mechanisms behind how meaningful coincidences happen. It's not string theory. It's not quantum fields, which make me to go like this. Because people use the term and don't know what they're talking about because they don't know what it, anyway, not quantum fields. It's something else. It's something else that our guest today stumbled across, came across, somehow did a work of William Tiller. And we're both very happy to talk with each other because she has the experience of an interviewer who's actually read her book and is trying to go through some of it already, and I have. If you're interested, I hope you are, in possible mechanisms for how synchronicity happened that can be measured and examined scientifically, you come to the right place. So with that introduction, I am now introducing Nisha Manek. She's internationally recognized in integrative medicine. She turned her scientific expertise to the singular question, the nature of consciousness. So yeah, she's not the only one wondering about that. I'm going to the consciousness conference in Tucson. Are you going to that?
I presented there at towards the science of consciousness several times. Yeah,
several times. Okay, well, I'm
not. I'm not going this time. Bernard, so much to do, so little time.
Oh, I've heard that one before. Her bestseller is Bridging Science and Spirit, which we got right here, and that's what I've been reading. I really have destroyed this book to some degree, just trying to read it before I talk with her. It's The Genius of William A. Tiller's Physics and the Promise of Information Medicine. And it proves that human intention, now everybody, talks about intention and manifestation, but this gets to like maybe how it works and what we can do with it. And some of the basic ideas are that space is not what we think it is. There's something else that can go on in space. And the chapter that has gotten my most attention is that physical space is malleable. In other words, physical space can be changed by our intentions. This is right to the, gets me right here, because this is like, I can visualize this stuff and I like to visualize it. She's committed to advancing medical knowledges and holistic approaches to health. She's a fellow of the American College of Physicians and the Royal College of Physicians of the United Kingdom. Well, it's a pleasure to actually have you on the program after having absorbed as much as I could about your book. So welcome, Nisha, to Connecting with Coincidence.
Dr. Beitman, first of all, thank you for having me. And this material that we're talking about is timeless. And I was 45 minutes late to your start. But I hope that we have a rich conversation. And you know what? Just before we came on to this recording, while we were chatting briefly, I am totally amazed. May I call you Bernie?
Yeah, please do.
Bernie, no one, and I've been to scores of podcasts throughout my 2 or 3 years since publishing this book. Very few people really dive in to bring out certain aspects of the tiller physics that really speak to the fundamental areas of how consciousness does its thing. And as a medical doctor, very traditionally educated, Scotland, Royal College, and I mean, just picture this person, white coat, stethoscope. I analyzed data all day, but there was something that really bothered me, and I called it the pothole of medicine. And I grew up in Kenya. I'm of Indian ethnicity. I went through UK, went to Stanford, went to the Mayo Clinic. So you're talking really conventional education. But there was something very much missing and still missing in medicine. And it's a big pothole. And that is, we think about medicine as just the body. Just imagine, and it really brings me to my medical education at the bedside, anatomy. Everything I did in medical school was things that I could dissect, measure, weigh, put a temperature, look under the microscope. In other words, I could see it, describe it, categorize it, label it, then try and fix it. But when you're in the real world, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. And we now know in medicine, certainly in America, which let's just say is one of the most advanced in medicine and has the poorest outcomes, already we're seeing a mismatch. Big pothole right here. We have to look at it. What have we created? And to me, the biggest missing piece in medical education is the human isn't just the body. The human is a multidimensional being, has consciousness, has creativity, and we can talk to each other, Bernie, and make sense of it. So we're looking at just the body, but we're missing the emotional part. We're paying a little bit of attention. You're a psychiatrist, so we're getting somewhere, to looking at that aspect. But ultimately, what is this thing about intention? And what is this big elephant in the room? Consciousness. We don't talk about consciousness. I don't remember even one classroom about consciousness. So here I am in Mayo Clinic, sort of muddling my way through prescriptions, diagnostic, blood testing, x-ray data, but I knew we were missing the mark. And so I was always looking for the next thing. It wasn't really the next thing. I knew that energy was huge. And I'm not talking calories, and I'm not talking about obesity. I'm talking about energy in its primal function. And energy, how physics would look at it is, energy is a way to do work. Now we're getting somewhere. And when I saw that, and I looked at physics textbooks, I look at chemistry textbooks, and you sort of go to the index like energy, and there's nothing there. There's not even a category of energy in many of my medical textbooks. You just run into energy as metabolism, but I'm talking about energy in how Tiller would see it. And that was the energy is the capacity, free energy. That's even another way to qualify it. Free energy to do work. And so I was thinking, okay, energy. So how did I get into energy? Well, when I was at the Mayo Clinic, I was asked to do a book chapter for a major medical textbook, Qigong. And I was invited to write on Qigong. And what is Qigong? Qigong is a subtype of Tai Chi. And what is Tai Chi? Tai Chi is the active practice to pump the acupuncture meridian systems. But there's a problem here. Because in medicine, I don't remember any big energy channels or highways running through the body. Where are these things? It sounds like a big mystery. And medical research has really struggled with this. And so I came across Tiller's papers in that textbook writing because I wanted to go into it, not just randomized controlled trials of doing Qigong and asthma and arthritis and all, which there is some evidence, but I wanted to go deeper into what is the characteristics of this energy? What is these things running up and down our body that we cannot see? And Tiller writes a very seminal paper. What are subtle energies? 1993. Journal of Scientific Exploration. It's a really beautiful paper, open source. And if your viewers are looking at this, please get this paper full of equations, full of mathematics. Okay, but something inside me said, oh, pay attention. I put it as a reference in The Power of Qigong in this medical textbook. And that's when I started writing to Tiller. I didn't know who he was, uh, you know. And by that time, he had retired from Stanford. I want to just say a few words about Dr. Tiller. He was the chairman of material science and engineering at Stanford for, I don't know, 35, 40 years. And he had deep knowledge of how to create new materials. He's an engineer and a material scientist, and he knew mathematics and thermodynamics and what really, you might say he was like a genius in creating new theories around materials. But there was another genius with Tiller, which I have not come across. I have not come across this. Tiller was an inner managed person, a scientist with not only outer excellence, but an inner way. And he had been meditating regularly since, I don't know, late 1960s or early 70s. He was a Rhodes Scholar, went to Oxford. He's, going to do some wonderful work in Oxford. And he actually left that. He says, I wanted to know these things, consciousness. It really bugged him. What is consciousness? How can we examine its effects? Because until really, let's look at this scientific assumption. In medicine, I say, I'm here and you're over there in that chair, and I'm going to give you Tylenol, and I know what its effects are. I'm being objective. And Tiller says, okay, but that assumption could be wrong. That's an unstated assumption that science is something out there, it's objective. And Tiller took that assumption and turned it on its head. He says, I think we've got to look at this unstated assumption and really ask ourselves, are we being honest about that? Are we really not having an effect on the experimental system that is in front of us? And only a really honest scientist like Tiller can ask that question. And also, he said, when I meditate, I feel something inside. I feel some warmth. Something is shifting inside. He was not afraid to go into that very subjective realm. And that's the tricky part. How do you take that internal subjective world and test it in a very scientific, rigorous, protocol-driven way? And he really said, and he was in Oxford here, and he said, okay, he looked around, maybe there's some science out there, and maybe we can give this kind of a loaded question to somebody that can match the internal world with a very purely objective, numerical way. You have to have a bridge of a mathematical connection. And he was after that, not just matrix. And, I come from a medical world, and I say, use words like 0 point and matrix. I was in that language, but I didn't know what I was talking about. And Tiller is very careful. He says, whenever you use words, you have to be knowing what you're talking about. So when he was in Oxford, he really wanted to know, how can we first test consciousness and then make an equation? So he comes back to Stanford, and he realized he had to do the work. It was him. And so he made space in his timetable. He's a chairman of physics. He didn't give up his conventional research, he continued it. But alongside his conventional research, he took on this question of consciousness. I'm just going to pause for a moment for your questions, Bernie.
Well, as you know from our discussion before we started recording, this history is something I'm familiar with. I've looked at your book, and the audience need to hear about it. I think it's important to say the words Stanford and Mayo Clinic. I went to Yale and went to Stanford. I was chairman of psychiatry department. I know what those words sound like, but when I was a chairman of psychiatry is when I started my synchronicity research. And I admire Tiller for having wondered about consciousness. But my question to start with, from what you've said, is Tiller did not define consciousness by what is it. He defined consciousness by what it does, by what consciousness does. Would you please explain that, what that means?
Well done again. So often when we think consciousness, certainly in medicine, we think of the brain immediately. I'm not interested in brain. The brain functional MRI doesn't tell anyone that Nisha loves the color blue, or she has certain preferences. You're drinking some juice. I had very good coffee. That's my routine. So Tiller is saying we do not have an agreed upon definition of the word consciousness,
Right.
right? We don't. So it's invisible. We cannot see it, we cannot taste it, but we feel it. And so Tiller said, okay, we don't have an agreed upon definition in science for consciousness. I'm not interested in brain imaging and all of that. Then he asked himself the question, then how does consciousness work? It does work by what it does. And how does it do things? It does things by thought, thinkingness. You have a thought, I have a thought. But Tiller is different here. Remember, this is a very inner self-managed person. When he uses the word intention, it is a singular aim, a singular purpose. He doesn't waver. And consciousness does things by intention. Then he went on, once he had that piece of the puzzle, then he could say, okay, can I test my own intention? And that was another very, I would say, radical jump. Because again, whenever you test something, it's always something out there. I'm going to do something out there. I'm going to put a Tibetan monk in an MRI machine, which is what a lot of consciousness studies does. I'm sorry, but, and I will come under fire for that because I've hosted the Buddha's relics at my home. And I know the risk that we take in saying certain things. So I respect that science, saying no, because it does teach us something about brain and all that. It's an exquisite perceptual tool. But Tiller says that's not where it is. Because you can go down the anatomy of the brain. Where does consciousness emanate from? The cell membrane? The phospholipid layer? The DNA? And I went down in my bridging science and prayer. I think I talked about the Planck's constant, the smallest region, physical region that science can go to, but we don't know where it comes from. We don't know where consciousness comes from. And this is where I say it's the field effect. It's everywhereness.
It's
There's no gaps. There's
it's
no gap.
it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
It's
Con-
everywhereness. It's everywhere. Everywhere means a field that has no gaps. That's important to note.
a field. What is a field?
It's a field is a region of influence. So my body has a biofield. And when I enter a room, I'll tell you this. I'll share a little story. When I first went into Tiller's labs, he went, "Oh my God, Nisha, your biofield is too much. Go sit in the corner," because all the needles went like this, woo. And he says, "No, no, no, Nisha, you're too excited. You need to sit in that corner so that you do not interfere with the instrument." So I didn't have to touch anything. I wasn't physically doing anything. I just entered the room. It's like saying you enter the room and you feel the person. You know, some people are pumper uppers and drainer downers. We're coming across those people. I mean, that's it. The field is an area of influence without physical touch. So the consciousness field is like an ocean, and you and I are individual expression of that oceanness, or that field of consciousness. It has potential. And from that field comes the right conditions make Dr. Bernard Beitman manifest. For me, it was Nisha, the right conditions in Kenya, I come. And in this lifetime, then, is what is Nisha's potential going to be? Am I going to take the comfortable pathway of professorship, or am I going to jump off the cliff and go into the unknown world of physics? All of these are consciousness effects. And you're choosing all the time with your intention what is in that potential and what actualizes. All right, from potential, you make it actual by intention. And this is what Tiller is saying. You are creating your reality. You're not a victim of anything out there.
So somebody who is a hostage in Gaza or a hostage in Israel has created that for themselves.
We are, okay, let me put it this way. You cannot see anything out there unless you see it in yourself. Your inner reality is consciousness. So yes, and that's really hard, isn't it? And the best example also is Viktor Frankl. In the most dire circumstances of Viktor Frankl's life, what sustained him?
His wife.
It was it wasn't his wife.
It was his.
It was,
It,
go ahead.
his wife was was there with him and gave him the courage to see that there was a possibility out of this life.
But she wasn't there physically.
No, she was there as a spirit.
She was there as a memory. The conditions for love exist. Let's just say it like that. The conditions of love exist in the worst circumstances, and Byron Katie speaks to that. She wakes up somewhere. I don't know her story in detail now, but the rats are running over her. And she realized, I am responsible for this condition. So, as awful as it all is, so prayer works, Bernie. And I'm holding this because in my daily meditation, it is now my practice twice a day. Twice a day, I get into my, and maybe I should blame my meditation because I was in a different and very joyful state. I was in such a state that I didn't even remember it was 3 p.m. Eastern or 12. I mean, to me, time is such a hard thing. I don't have alarm clocks or anything. Okay. But when you do meditation, I hold. We're holding the whole of humanity on our backs. We don't have to bend over. We are being assisted. what makes you think I was all alone? And I say, dear God, be my partner today. Dear God, you and I are in clinic today. I do telemedicine, and I absolutely ask for assistance. So love exists in the worst of the worst circumstances. Gaza, Israel, Ukraine. Us here in California, we see it, right? Homelessness off the charts. Every state of consciousness exists in me, so I can see it out there. You cannot see it out there unless it's in you. Okay? It's if that's a writer downer, as I call it, you can only see it out there unless you see it in yourself. And Viktor Frankl, in his memoir, God bless him, that memory of his wife, that love, he didn't know whether she was dead, but at that moment he knew that that love inside, nobody has can take away. They can do this, they can chop your head off, they can chop your hand off, they can put you in whatever, they can starve you, they can torture you, but that seed, that kernel of love cannot be destroyed. That is eternal. And
You're,
you've got me so pumped up right now.
and I'm glad you're not in my laboratory, because the machines would be popping all over the place.
Yeah.
But it's muted by, yes, I got you stirred up, and that's the whole idea of this stuff. Because I want to stir you. So you've just done your consciousness rant, I'll call it. You, 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 you're a passionate, passionate person. That was clear from your writing, and you're kind of funny too, and the kinds of twists and turns you do about Granny in there, and the kind of basic life analogs you use to describe difficult to understand concepts. But may we please talk about the water?
Yes, yes. Granny effect. Let me just talk a little bit because this is so important.
It is important.
So, when I mentioned prayer, that when I pray, this is serious. For me, it is absolute joy. And that I know my prayer of this person. How many people does it take to save the world? You. It's you. You're the chosen one. So take your prayer seriously. And so in the book, Bridging Science and Spirit, I do write about the granny effect. When your grandmother prays for you, how does it reach you at the other end of the world? I asked that question. How does it penetrate the walls of your house? How does it know the address of your house? I mean, she's not calling you down the telephone wire. She didn't call you. These are fundamental questions because in our modern world, science has taken the place of truth, the ultimate truth. We think we need devices, telephone wires, all these wireless thingies, artificial intelligence. All of this is so topical. But the granny effect will never, it's timeless.
What's the granny?
Technology,
What's the granny
the
effect?
the grandmother effect, when she prays for you, it does reach you. And then I go on to explain in Bridging Science and Spirit, it's a field effect. You and Granny were never separate. You're connected all the time. This illusion of separation is just that.
Well,
And
I mean, we let's say our audience tends to know that and
okay,
let's just
okay.
say this idea that we're not islands unto ourselves is pretty well out there among people who pay attention to how reality might be working. That's not so impressive anymore, that we're all connected somehow, we're all part of a field. But how does Granny's prayer reach me? How does it get to me? That's to call that a field effect is insufficient, because field effects are a very general term. So
Mm-hmm.
Granny's field and my field, but how do they find each other?
Beautiful mystery, isn't it? How does it penetrate your home? So I make the point in Bridging Science and Spirit that this is subtle energy effects. Subtle energy is not electromagnetic. It doesn't behave like light, okay? It doesn't travel or decay thousands of miles. An electromagnetic signal goes away, it can decay, you get white noise. But granny effect is not the same. And there are many mysteries that I cannot explain.
How does there's a mystery here, yes, and you made it very clear that you can put a Faraday cage around an instrument that's sending out an intention, and it still doesn't affect the intention of the machine. We might get to that. And there's experiments of Faraday cages at the bottom of the ocean to see if
Mhm.
people can be clairvoyant. And the magnetic field has nothing to do with it. It's how how does how does that prayer of Granny find me is part of my question. Not how does it get through the walls of the house. Your book makes that clear. That's not a question. There's some
Mhm.
underlying reality which you refer to as the R space, which I hope we will get to. That's not the regular three-dimensional reality that you call the D space. It's not how it gets through the walls, or even how if it travels. It travels faster than the speed of light, which is a
Right.
very important thing to notice because oh, a lot of people have wondered what's so big deal about the speed of light. Yeah, Einstein was pretty smart, but why is that 186,000?
Well, that we have to drop that limitation that the speed of
We
light is, right?
we
So,
have to
but
drop
but you're
that.
but but you're really talking to how does it know your address,
That's
if I
right.
just use it
How does
that
it
way?
know my psyche?
I don't know. I do
Well,
not know.
I have ideas about that because that's a crucial question that you are not answering in your book, and
Mhm.
that's a vital question in this. And
So,
I'm not
Bernie, let's tell me. Yes, we're in this beautiful space to share that conversation. What are your thoughts around this?
that we have the capacity to locate people in space like human GPS can locate a position to get to, and that the
Mhm.
technologies that we develop, like what we're doing here now, are simply reflections of our inner capacities, that we can do this without the machinery, that we can broadcast and connect and see the minds of other people, and even more than that, experience the experience of other people at a distance. And
Yes.
we have this capacity to localize them in three-dimensional space as we understand it. And I think it goes through the connection goes through the R space, the space what we're going to be talking about, that's always with us, that's around us, that science hasn't been measuring, that is correlated with the temperature, with the pH of water, which we will
Mhm.
be getting to, that this,
So you're right. What you're talking about is the latent capacities of human beings,
yes,
and they awaken it. Now, I mentioned very briefly in pillar number 2 about remote viewing.
yes,
It's very real.
it's very
It's
real.
very real. And Patricia Cyrus was one of the gifted remote viewers who worked with, I think it was the Bush administration, right?
Oh,
And now it's declassified. It's
yeah, it's
declassified.
And Joe McGonigal, who was a key part of this, that whole thing lives around here. So we kind
Oh,
of we're
okay.
kind of
Yeah.
familiar with that idea that you could find an airplane that went down in maybe Kenya. I don't remember exactly where in
Yeah.
Africa, and nobody could find it with the air uh, with radar, and but a remote viewer as part of Stargate found it in a river, uh,
Yeah.
and they saw
Yeah.
natives taking the parts walking up from the river. That's how they knew more specifically where it was. So
Yeah.
remote viewing is something that a lot of people are able to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I have started to be able to do channeling, so that I can connect with people who are departed. And I just talked
Yes.
earlier with somebody who helped me sharpen my capacities to be able to do that. There's a lot of human abilities that are reflected in other people, but also in the machinery we use. So that's why I was talking about human GPS.
I just want to make a comment here about these are called siddhi powers in Hindu Vedic
Yeah, it's cities.
language.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Siddhis, okay?
yeah, yeah.
So when you and I'll describe a case where this was a patient of mine, and she took on you. We had these conversations at the bedside, and she got deep into meditation. I'd left Mayo, and she called me urgently and said, I need to talk to you. I thought she was talking about her medical condition. No, she says, I've become clairvoyant. I can read people's minds and I don't like it. This is disturbing my day to day life. She could know what's on her husband's mind, her son's mind, her friend's mind, the neighbor's mind. She says, shut it off. I said,
That's
well, okay. Oh, it just awoke in her. And
yeah.
she, not only that, she could not only read people's minds, she knew what was going to happen in the future. About a week, she knew the weather or accidents, she knew. It was so bothersome to her that we can say, I want these gifts. Be careful what you wish for, but you will awaken them with meditation. But here's the warning. So that's one warning. Don't do meditation for the gifts. Do meditation to transcend levels of consciousness. We don't want to get stuck in clairvoyance and remote viewing, which will happen, but keep moving on and reach Christ consciousness.
That was one of the fundamental lessons of the old Hindus. They didn't want people to get caught up in the cities, because
Yes.
like the parapsychological things we're talking about, because they would get too aggrandized, some of them. And
Oh,
as you're
yeah.
talking, some of them became too overwhelmed, as you're talking about. But I'm so special because I can do it. But you have to be able to
Yes.
manage it. And I am very much interested in augmenting human capacities for these abilities, but within guidelines that allow us to do it. And synchronicity is a name that covers a lot of different stuff, including telepathy and clairvoyance and precognition. It's
But I
part,
would also say, Bernie, sorry, I'm interrupting, but get that paper. What are subtle energies? Because it makes you, it is mathematical, and it's one of the resources for bridging science and spirit. But I only cover very basic things. I wanted my book to be a doorway for my colleagues to see a different potential, information medicine, and for them to have a pit stop, you might say. We saw the pothole, the pit stop, and then we can get into intention. Not to be that it is a scientific way towards medicine, that we can jump ahead from chemical prescriptions all day long. So anyway, but what are
uh,
subtle
uh,
energies would be absolutely a fundamental for you.
let, one of the problems I have with your book is not your book itself, but the definition of information.
Mm.
Uh, as Tiller tries to say, and I'm so much a fan of, if you use a word, you better know what its reference is. And the term information in your book is has to do with structured, something that's structured. The more structured it is, the more entropy it has. But the more structured it is a form of information. A friend of mine
Mhm.
says information is a signal to action. I like that really a lot because it gets
Yes,
close to your definition of consciousness. So I'm not trying to get a definition of information right now, but I think it's an important question to know
yes,
what we mean by that term, because the Bell Labs guy was not trying to have exactly meaning in it. But let's say
yes.
that's another term that needs more clarification. But what I
Yeah, Shannon, you're talking about Shannon and
yes,
the theory of communication. He was talking about
he
communication.
was.
And when I first met Tiller, and which itself is a story, because honestly, how do you even pick Diller? I had so many options. I knew I needed to expand my toolbox away from just drugs.
Because
But
whatever we call your intuition is knew that you had to do it.
I had to do it.
And the way I got to you was haphazard. And I'm really glad because I said, "What's that? What's this?" And I got this book, and I didn't even. I wanted to look at it a little bit. I went too late. We we stumble across things because we have an intuition that guides us to where we
Yeah.
need to do that helps fulfill our purpose. Now, I'm going to now try to keep you on to chapter 29,
Okay.
which is what I've been wanting to talk with you about from the beginning. And the title of this chapter is Physical Space is Malleable to Human Intention.
Mhm.
There's a lot of words to be defined here: malleable, changeable. We can almost get to that. Influenceable. Physical space is not the physical space of your grandmother. It's not what your uncle thinks it is. It's the space that has this we're going to talk about these frequencies that are stabilized pretty much running through our lives, running through our planet, that help communicate some of the cities, some of the parapsychological things that we have been talking about,
Mhm.
and has mirror images of it in it of what we think of as regular three-dimensional reality. And these
Yeah.
are the hints that Nisha is giving us through her work on William Tiller's work about how we might explain meaningful coincidences in more scientific terms, and maybe get to a place where we can do a little measuring and a little more direct training in how to help people sharpen their ability to have synchronicities, because there's pretty good evidence now that the more synchronicities you have that are good ones, your well-being increases. Your
Oh yeah.
connectivity,
Yeah.
you're
Mhm.
good. The connectivity with other people increases. Your heart opens up. You can be more spiritually connected to what's going around you. And I want to be able to get, and I didn't see it in your book. I didn't see much about love, if anything, in your book. Love.
Oh, it's all in pillar number 7.
Oh, it's only so I haven't gotten there yet. Okay.
Oh, yes,
Well,
yes, yes.
I
So,
mean,
so I do give and this is a very important part. Yeah,
I
go ahead.
distracted us with this. So let's
Oh,
please, Nisha, please let's stay with the water temperature thing, because
yes,
I think that's it's in the middle of the book, and it's kind of the fulcrum around which all of this goes, from what I can tell.
yes.
So,
So Tiller's experiments, he created this protocol. He's going to test his intention and test it. Okay. Now, he's a material scientist. He knows intimately the behavior, atoms, molecules, what shifts them and what doesn't. He says, okay, my intention, can it change water? And you could change all properties of water, okay? But he chose pH. He chose that because it's reproducible. Other labs around the world could do this kind of work. So he was very conscious about, this is physics. People can do this on their tabletop. He didn't have millions and billions of dollars in CERN somewhere smashing particles. This is important to know. This is tabletop science, right? So he takes water and asks himself, can I, just with my intention, no chemical additions, I'm not zapping the water, I'm not doing anything to the water, can I measurably shift the pH down or up? Very specific. And he chose another measurement, which is not a point little random unit on the pH. One pH unit is a huge signal. And the body's pH is 7.4. If I was 8.4, I'd be dead. 6.4, I'd be dead. So look, 7 is the neutral pH of water. So for him to say one full pH of signal is, he set a very high bar. Okay. And so then he goes on to say, well, I asked him this, why did you choose a device? What has that got to do with anything? He said, Nisha, first of all, it's a completely new protocol. We didn't know it would work. He was a theoretical physicist. He had to then have his experimentalists run the experiment. Okay. So he says, well, you can't intend over and over and over again, 24 hours, weeks on end. I needed a way for my information because thoughts are subtle energy. I had to give it a direction, as you said, a design. I wanted it to be a laser pointer, not just a light. I wanted it a laser pointer, cohesive, coherent beam of information that a device can do that. You switch on the device and let's see. So he not only said, one, I'm going to put my intention as this device. Then this device is then sent to a lab, which doesn't know the intention in the first place, and they ran the pH experiments. Okay, so it's a double whammy. I mean, can your intention change an object to hold your thought? Secondly, is it stable? Third, will that device now or that object change the target, in this case, water? And will it do it in the line of the original intention? I mean, I didn't believe his stuff when I first read it. I thought, no way. I, I don't believe this. And I needed to see it in action, which is one of the reasons I went to his labs. And I had to look at these things, all right, and these reproducible experiments. He says, you don't reproduce anything, Nisha. You have to just understand the broad concepts and communicate something about this. Well, look, those devices not only held the information, the imprinted devices, he invented the term imprinted host device, IHD. That IHD was sent to Minnesota, and that lab then took that device about 6 inches from the water, switched it on. At first, it would take a month, but the pH would always change, nearly a full pH. But what was really interesting was when you do any thermodynamics, you have to know thermodynamic language to be able to know that the water, if you zap it or do something to it, it has thermodynamic properties. You can do calculations. Now he was reaching for the mathematical connections. But here's the thing. Now, there's so much I could share here. I'm trying to sort of distill it down. One of the things that the receiving lab found was initially it would take a month or two, and then they got new devices. They would reproduce it. Then it became faster and faster and faster. 1 week, and the pH was going. What's this about time? That's the beauty. Because when you do thermodynamics, you want to know the ambient conditions of your lab itself. You want to monitor the space, which is what they did. And that's where he discovered a very major piece. And he wasn't after the space at all. He was just being a good scientist and measured the ambient conditions because they go into calculations. And he found a very odd behavior of the lab space. The lab was absolutely the air temperature of the lab was very rhythmic. It had nothing to do with air conditioning or heating. It had nothing to do with the diurnal temperature variations from morning till night. It had nothing to do with air currents. And I described those things that he went into. He says, we were absolutely flummoxed. What do these things mean? They were literally big signals, very rhythmic. And that's where the Fourier analysis comes in. He did mathematics and found, whoa, 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 they're harmonics. They nest into each other. It's like the whole room is singing, you know, the whole room is pumping. It's pumping the whole setup, and that's what I found in his labs in Payson. This was not an ordinary lab, Bernie. Every single time Tiller and I had a meeting in his patient labs, I would come away refreshed, energized. I went, Dr. Tiller, I don't know what happens in your labs, but I feel great. He says, oh, yes, my dear. That he used to call me kiddo and my dear. Yes, I'm not surprised. It's a conditioned space. It's in our space. That's when he began to realize that his thinking, his thought, that device was lifting. Now we're getting into the space itself. Space doesn't have coordinates. It doesn't have a center, but we need something to describe it, right? That's where gauge, the term gauge symmetries comes into it. You have an ordinary reality, then you have the next higher up reality. The ordinary reality is what was described in CERN, the standard model of physics, material things. But we know this is, again, boring knowledge, but it's worth saying it. I'm sitting on a chair. I knocked on my table. It feels solid, but we know, Bernie, you and I know that empty space is the absolute reality. What gives things I mean, they feel firm and real because of the electromagnetic forces that hold them together. But the ultimate reality is empty space. And Tiller realized this isn't about material things. It's not air molecules bouncing. We're now touching the first level. We're malleable, first level of physical vacuum. And that physical vacuum is enormous source of energy. That's where the energy is coming from. That's at our disposal. We just don't know how to go there yet. But Wheeler in Princeton has calculated that when you have quantum mechanics and the cosmos, there is this, it seems the quantum world and the cosmos, you have to have a unity. And physics has struggled with that. Where's the unification? What explains everything? So John Wheeler has done calculations to calculate the latent energy in the physical vacuum. Let me put it this way. The tip of my finger, the material aspect of my finger, is enough energy to light up the city of Los Angeles for a whole year. Just to give a little perspective, okay? It is enormous, inconceivable amounts of energy. And I give in Bridging Science and Spirit the example of one hydrogen atom. The space of that hydrogen atom, the proton, the electron, sort of enormous empty space. What's that? What's that space about? But if you calculate the energies, a single hydrogen atom has more latent energy than 15 billion light years of our cosmos. What's holding this thing together? Bernie, that's the mystery too. I don't know, but I have an idea. And I think this is where divine intelligence is. And that's us. If you are going to do science out there, you better get real about inside and start to feel it and know that these are our realities. So all these things about energy deficiencies and we're going to run out, that's nonsense. If you and your creative energies are infinite and you are Christ consciousness, where does the limitation come from? Why did we adopt this as our belief systems? And that's the thing for me as a doctor, at my patients, I have to really take their belief systems and nudge them away from this, that you are capable of healing. Anyway, but physical space is absolutely the key to intention's effect. And that's why Tiller said there's direct space, ordinary reality, and the reciprocal space is a mirror image. And he describes it mathematically.
And in that reciprocal space, in that R space, there's somehow an ability to access energy. But before that, that our space, that reciprocal space, reciprocal to our conventional reality, there are, at least in Tiller's lab, these this these nested harmonic frequencies running through the lab because it's a conditioned space. And by
Yes.
conditioned space, I think it means that it has provided that space access to that next level of a field. I don't know what the right word to call it
I
is.
think, okay, so D space and R space are always around us. You were right. The amount of connectivity to our space, the next level, is where there's degrees. Okay, you could have nothing, just a D space, or you could start having conditioning, connectivity to our space where you're fully our space. But there's levels beyond that. Okay, we're just talking U1 gauge and SU2 gauge. And we won't go into the physics nomenclature. It's not necessary. I do it because
It's not
give some
necessary.
evidence. Yeah, it's not really necessary. But
But you do mention magnetic potential as having something to do with the connectivity.
yes, so look, one of the giants of quantum theory was Paul Dirac. Dirac knew, and he in his equations to describe the electron behavior. Okay, we had equations at that time, and people were struggling with using, I think it was Newtonian physics to describe quantum behaviors. They were close, but not, it wasn't. Approximations do not work here. And Paul Dirac took it on himself to look at this issue. And he came up with his equations, the Dirac equation, and he said, whoa, you do have electrons, but there is another level of space there where you get energy from, and that's where materials come up, and you leave an empty hole in the potential space. He says that is the physical vacuum. He called it empty space, and now physics calls it physical vacuum. What's vacuum? It's not really empty. It's potential, but it doesn't have material stuff as you and I would think about it. It doesn't have billiard balls or little particles bouncing around. Potential. And Dirac said there's an enough energy input into that vacuum and out pops an electron, but to balance the equation, you have to balance negative with positive. He predicted the positron, antimatter, right? And he was very uncomfortable because, look, he was ridiculed. Actually, Paul Dirac says it doesn't make sense. We don't know if this antimatter even exists, but the equations are very beautiful. They seem to pan out in every which way. But 4 years later, Anderson, right, Caltech, found it in this chamber, cloud chamber, where he says, whoa, what's this track going this way? And yes, he confirmed. And he didn't know about Dirac's work. He didn't know that
Well,
Dirac's equation had predicted the positron. So there's
and
matter and antimatter.
this what you described is a pattern in physics and other places where somebody comes up with an idea somehow, intuitive, tuning in to information that's out there that he's a little bit ahead of. It's a little bit like simultaneous independent discoveries. People come up with the same ideas because human mind is ready for that, and then somebody else independently comes up to confirm it. These are not particularly surprising, but they're amazing. I mean, these are the things that make the world go round, quite literally. But
Yeah,
it's
but here's the thing that Dirac predicted. His equations predict the magnetic monopole.
yeah, and that's the
That means you have electrons, positive, negative, but we haven't found the magnet monopole. We only find two poles. We find dipolar magnets. And people have spent bazillion, million dollars. I mean, people have really looked at this question. Where could they be? And then I describe a little thought experiment in Bridging Science and Spirit where I have my garage and Tiller has his garage. In the Basin Labs, which is his garage, the magnetic monopole effect exists, because the South Pole and the North Pole are very different pH effects. How can that be? Conventional physics does not describe that, but his does. His reality in his garage is very different than Nisha's garage, where she's doing the same thing, intending and all that, doing the water pH. And I'm not as developed as Tiller, okay? Um, so that was to describe that magnetic monopoles, we are searching for them in the wrong place and in the wrong conditions.
And we have to
That's
be,
pretty radical for me to say, okay? But
and you
it's
say it
there.
pretty clearly in your book too, for anybody who's going to read it.
Okay.
There's conditioned space, and you're talking about Tiller's garage being conditioned space in a variety of mechanisms that are not so clear. But this conditioned space gets him into the direct sea, as you call it, or that's has a mirror image of what's in the direct or the regular reality. And we're going to need to stop because we just have about an hour to do these things. That mirroring between the Dirac's ocean or sea and this regular reality that they use direct space for is a beginning analog for how to understand how coincidences can happen.
Right.
And intention plays an important role in this. So you're on to something very, very important for what I think synchronicity has to do with, as well as a clue for the rest of us through synchronicity to how this reality works. The synchronicity happens a lot with people in various ways. Now you're through the work of Tiller coming up with, it seems to me, a way of imagining in a scientific way how some synchronicities operate. And I applaud you, and I applaud your getting so deeply into Tiller and the physics and writing this magnificent book, which is not so easy to
I'm
read.
glad of the synchronicity, Bernie, that we're even talking.
Well,
I mean, I just got out of the blue your email and I thought, sure, sure.
and it was David Lorimer to put us together, and it was like I was reaching. I just grabbed. I saw, and hey, David, blah, 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 and that's how it happened. So it was intuitive pop, like a lot of coincidences can be, and you're onto something, and it's got to be developed. This R space, how to condition space. I think I conditioned this room because this is
Yeah,
where I write and this is where I do my podcast. And I got disturbed when somebody just walked into this room who was staying here. Uh,
yeah.
Politely asked him not to do that again. I knew that was something. There's something, and now this space is got energy somehow, and how we think about that, how we follow what you've been able to tell us from Tiller is really, really important as we try to understand how to make this world a better place for all of us. So thank you
Yes.
very much for your
Thank you.
very, very good work here.
Bernie, thank you for having me, and thank you again for your generosity and patience. That's a divine quality right there. uh,
Thank you very, very
thank
much.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.